But now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ian Cameron as our speaker. Dr. Cameron is an author, a storyteller that we've heard many times. He is this year's History and Narrative, Story and Family Medicine guest speaker. You'll soon recognize that he's a different kind of a guy, a very special person and a mentor to many of us. He's been a professor at the Department of Family Medicine at Dow and combined a love of history and humanities with family medicine. Over 100 published articles. He's written a book, Quarantine, What's Old is New, and he currently oversees the series Historicals in the Canadian Family Physician. Dr. Cameron is a recipient of numerous awards, and some of them are really quite fascinating awards. The Oswald Avery Medal in Medical History, the Archibald Gold-Headed Cane Award in Medical Humanities, the Victor Johnson Oration Award, and the John B. Nelson Award in History of Medicine. No family doctor ever retires, and so having left the Dalhousie University, I think Ian is probably working harder than he ever has in a rural community in Nova Scotia. I met Ian initially as he was the lead bagpiper and haggis maker at FMF in Calgary, I think about 1995. He's successfully partnered with an artist, and together they've produced 2 teachers, a food writer, an architect, and 7 grandchildren. Ian.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was a pellucid introduction and just the right amount of hyperbole. Just the exact right. Distinguished patron, is Madam President here? Madam President, award winners, ladies and gentlemen, and story aficionados. The importance of stories. Part of my story is in British Columbia. My wife Bev and I, when we joined together and our medical and nursing careers, we traveled as far as we could go in British Columbia and then 40 miles further to the Queen Charlotte Islands. And we had a wonderful year of memory investments, and then we left the rainforest and returned to the east to begin our family. Time passed. We went to a meeting of the College of Family Physicians in Whistler in the early 90s. And Tony Bennett left his heart in San Francisco, and I left some myocardium in Whistler. Time passed, and our youngest daughter and her husband have just started their careers in Kelowna in British Columbia, and so the great cycle continues. Now, what I have just told you is narrative, the what and the then and the then and the then. Now, if I told you that in Whistler, when I lost some of my myocardium, I was playing a tennis game with John Keddy and desperately trying to win the tennis game, that is plot, the why. And we in family medicine deal with the what and the why, with narrative and with plot. Dr. Arthur Frank, who gave this address to the award-winning family medicine writers last year, is a distinguished writer, and he's written many stories. And he, this is not his teapot, but this is a book that he wrote the introduction to, and the book is interesting too, and I would highly recommend it to those who haven't seen it. It's called In Our Hands, and it's on becoming a doctor, and it's stories by medical students from right across Canada. Dr. Frank wrote the introduction, and in it he used a word, liminal. And he defines liminal as being neither this nor that. And as an example, he said the cultivated field next to the village, and then there's a space, and then there's the forest. Well, the space is the liminal. It's neither cultivated nor is it the forest. He went on to say that from being single to married to family, from being married to divorce, from going from retirement or going from career to retirement, and going from innocence to adolescence. So many of them are in these transition states, and daily we talk to individuals and we listen to their narrative and their storylines, their plot lines, and they can be both dangerous and fascinating. So the question is, can we be better physicians if we learn to see our patients in their context, in their story? There was a patient in our practice who was young. She had come to the city from the country to find out her future. She had asthma. One day we received a discharge summary from the hospital saying that she had had an acute asthmatic attack, had been intubated in the emergency room, had been admitted to the ICU and put on a respirator. And they encouraged us to follow her up. So we saw her and follow up with increasing frequency over the next number of months. Her chest findings were always normal. Her oxygen saturation was fine. She had no wheezing. She had no prolonged expiratory phase. But she looked tired. And at times she looked distressed. And she would say, "Can you help me breathe?" And we tweaked a few things, and then we arranged for respirology to see her. They went over with a fine-tooth comb. They tweaked her medications. It made absolutely no difference. She began to haunt the emergency room, and the diagnosis went from asthma to anxiety to panic attack. And so we talked to her about psychiatric consultation, and she said, "Can they help me breathe?" One day, our resident concluded that we really hadn't defined her problem. It was clear that she was not an acute asthmatic. And so she took a different tack. She told our patient to write down precisely what had happened to her and why she couldn't breathe. And the next day, our patient brought in this written account. And she said, "I was having a very bad asthma attack. I went to the emergency room. The nurse set up an IV. Someone injected something into the IV, and then suddenly I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. I was paralyzed. I was in a room full of doctors and nurses, and no one could hear me. I couldn't tell them my problem. I was living a nightmare. And then someone put something down my throat, and then I don't remember. And I woke up in a dark room with a tube down my throat, and I was attached to a machine. And since then, I constantly have been reliving the moment when I couldn't breathe and I was paralyzed." She made a very good recovery over the next several months. A year later, she was married. We delivered her first baby. The resident had found a way for our patient to reveal the why in her story. Jacques Ferrand is considered in writing circles to be the preeminent physician writer in Canada, and he's inspired Dr. Adet, but he is largely unknown to medical students, and he's largely unknown to physicians in Canada. He was born in Louisville in Quebec in 1921. He was taught classics by the Jesuits. He received his medical degree from Laval in 1945. He went to practice in Rivière Madeleine in the Gaspé, And then later he moved to, and Jacques Frenette is my coach, and I was talking to him yesterday, and I said, the name of the community he moved to on the south side of the St. Lawrence River, just opposite Montreal, it's Longueuil, and Jacques had no idea what I was talking about. And eventually it dawned on him what I was trying to say, and he said, oh yes, you can't pronounce that. Don't even try to say it. Say Saint Lambert, or in your case, say St. Lambert. He moved to St. Lambert. Anyhow, Jacques has been very helpful to me, and but tells me where not to go if I can't pronounce it. Anyhow, 40 years ago, this very month, the October crisis was taking place, and Dr. Ferrand was chosen as the mediator with the Laporte kidnappers. He mediated between them and the government.